For years, I've been obsessed about the next meal. Do you know what that feels like? Having breakfast and wondering, when is lunchtime? What are we going to have for lunch? What is there for lunch? And I remember friends of mine, we talk about this. Isabel always carries several snacks in any bag that she has. That is not normal. And I thought everyone spent their whole days thinking about food. And I was the only one that was being outspoken about it. But it turns out it's not the case. So having internal peace is invaluable. And I remember having that realization one day, like, oh, wait a minute, I'm not obsessed. I remember once just sitting down, chilling, not being anxious at all about what I was going to have for lunch. That was a massive win for me.
Hello and welcome to PCOS Explained, formerly the PCOS Nutritionist Podcast. I'm your host, Claire Goodwin, a registered nutritionist and exercise scientist, specialising in PCOS because I have it too. Each week, we'll uncover the latest research, share inspiring stories, and provide practical tips to help you thrive with PCOS. Whether you're newly diagnosed, you've been struggling with this for a long time, or supporting someone with PCOS, this podcast is your go-to resource for empowerment, education, and community. So join us as we uncover the tools to thrive with PCOS. PCOS Explained is brought to you by our very own service, Ovi. Ovi is your go-to health service for women with PCOS. We help you improve your PCOS symptoms and prevent the long-term complications of PCOS by giving you hyper-personalised health advice based on your specific symptoms and PCOS drivers. We have a range of plans to suit your needs, from a DIY app-based program to one-on-one consultations. You choose what suits your budget and learning preference. And we offer a result-based guarantee on our Premium Plus plan, meaning that if we don't help you achieve your goal, we refund your money. Ovi is available worldwide, so it doesn't matter whether you're based in the UK, US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, or anywhere else, we can still help you. Today on the podcast, I'm interviewing the wonderful Isabel. I wanted to interview Isabel because she has been doing our program now for years. With this experience comes wisdom and also a breadth of symptoms and experiences, both good and bad. She suffered from weight gain, acne, irregular cycles, and fertility challenges. But as you'll hear in her story, and indeed most other stories on here, her life isn't a fairy tale of everything working out perfectly. There have been ups and downs and trauma, but her simple lifestyle tweaks have helped her weather these ups and downs. And by keeping things very simple, she's been able to maintain these for years. So I'll hand over to Isabel to enjoy her story. Isabel, thank you so much for joining me here and sharing your story with us. It's great. And I know you've got a young child and it's the end of the day for you. And you have done, I know from having a child myself, you have done so much to be here. So thank you very much for all of the organising and thinking that you've done to get yourself to where you can actually come and do this podcast with me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And so what I would love is if you could take us back to where you think that your PCOS journey started.
Sure. So I love how you frame it as PCOS journey, because it's not the same as when did your PCOS flourish. So in 2020, so about 3, almost 4 years ago, in the summer, I stopped birth control, which I had been on for at least 10 consecutive years. And in the previous years, also on and off quite regularly. And so the thinking was that I would want to have a child in the coming years. And I knew that sometimes people struggled for whatever reason to get back their period. And so I just wanted to see what would happen. I went on to have quite a lot of symptoms. So, I mean, you name it. I had hair loss, my face started growing acne like crazy, like cystic, angry acne. I put on a lot of weight despite exercising a lot and being quite good with my diet. I had a lot of hungry attacks. So I probably had like anxiety peaks, that I would eat too much comfort food. And then I just spiraled. To be honest, I spiraled, my symptoms spiraled. And 3 months later, I had no period, by the way, in case it's not obvious. I had no sign of a period for more than 100 days. And I had put on about 10 kilos in, I don't know if it was the span of 2 or 3 months, despite exercising almost daily, sometimes even twice a day. So nothing added up. The math wasn't adding up. No, calories in, calories out, overcompensating with exercise. I was really anxious. I was a mess. And so honestly, I was at a loss. I remember thinking this had something to do with my period, but I went to an OB and I asked. And mind you, my mom has cysts in her ovaries and she has a lot of the PCOS symptoms, but she had never been diagnosed. So why would I think that I had these? And I remember asking, do I have cysts in my ovaries? Because I had heard stories in the past. No, you don't. And then I just started Googling. And I guess I was just lucky because I started Googling and I found you and I listened to so many podcasts, by the way, while running, way too much running. And I remember sometimes running way too long and thinking, oh, this person said that this is not good for their PCOS. Maybe I shouldn't do it. So anyway, long and behold, I read a couple of books. I struggled with a UK GP because I was living in the UK at the time. And I managed to get an appointment with an endocrinologist. This person said that I had, it was like just opening a book about PCOS and all the symptoms were there. And he was quite understanding, which was really nice. And so, yeah, in a nutshell, I would say that's how it all started.
Yeah. And so looking back before you went on the pill, were there any signs and symptoms of this?
Yes. I mean, again, like by the book. So I had a late period. I want to say it was when I was 13, but it could have been later. I just remember within my class in school, I was one of the late ones. And the whole thing about regularity, I remember when I moved to the UK as an adult and someone asked me, how frequently do you have your periods? It was such an alien question to me. I said, how would I know? So that's how irregular my cycles were. I never had a regular cycle, not 20, not 30. Maybe I had 3 cycles a year or something like that. And nobody asked, so I guess I never shared it. And mind you, of course, I had like horrible acne, but who doesn't as a teenager? Like some people get very lucky. I was not a lucky one. I did balloon as well quite a lot. I had hunger attacks as well when I was young, but some teenagers do as well. So, now looking back, it was quite obvious. And also I had, by the way, I was very anemic and I had very high cholesterol as well. So, had I spoken to someone who was aware of all of these and could, put all the pieces together, then it would have been a very clear diagnosis. But I wasn't that lucky at the time.
No, but at least obviously you got onto a good pill, right? Like that helped with symptoms. And I think that's, like while, yes, it doesn't help to regulate your period, it, like at least it was helping with the acne by the sounds of things, if at the very least.
That's how I started on birth control. That was the first sort of like line of attack against the acne, which by the way, it helped to a certain degree, but it didn't clear it out. Like I had to take a lot of Accutane, a lot.
Right. So how many rounds of that did you have to do? Because I think this is so good for people to hear, because like the amount of people that I talk to that are like, yeah, I've had to do at least 3 rounds of Accutane. Everyone else says that 1 should be enough. And it's like, well, no, not if you have PCOS. This is super common.
So I don't know how you would consider a round, but my mom was against it when I was young because they didn't give it to her, which is not a great thing. And so only when I was in university, I could go on my own and speak to a doctor and they could prescribe it. So I was quite old when I got into Accutane. I was 21, I think. And they had me on a super high dose. When you're, I don't know if you've experienced it, you get really dry everything. So your face dries out, which is what you want. However, your knuckles, depending on the dose, your knuckles can also like get so dry that they bleed. And also your lips and things like that. And you can get also extremely tired. And I was at uni. It wasn't great. I remember my finals, like, just trying to make it to the finish line. But I think I was on 60 milligrams a day, which is super high dose considering my weight, right? Because they adjusted per weight. I was a somewhat tiny person at the time. So, but it was at least a full year.
Right. Yeah. So I think like in New Zealand, what they would do is they would give you, it's generally I don't know if it's standard amount. Actually, no, I don't know that, but they might adjust the dose, but they would give it to you for a certain amount of time. And then that should, they say it should only be a one-time drug, but a lot of people with PCOS get remission, and maybe 2 or 3 years later they might have to do another round and then another round, which is what I mean by having to do. But it sounds like for you what they did was probably a longer time for at a higher dose.
But also, yes, so they started off with the standard dose, and then they upped it a little bit. And then because I had like a few cysts that otherwise they said that they would have to like surgically remove.
Wow.
Yeah, no, it was quite bad. So they just threw like all the bombs at it. Yeah, yeah, I was really struggling towards the end. I have to say that.
Yeah. And so when I said before, like it sounds like at least they got you onto the right pill. Like it helped a little bit, but not.
No, no, it helped a tiny bit, and it also helped in the sense that it gave me the false sense that I was somewhat regular to a certain degree. Oh, yeah. I mean, there's nothing like not knowing. Yeah.
Yeah. And in hindsight, is that what you thought? You had no idea that that wasn't ovulatory?
I had no idea. If I could go back and talk to my teenage self, I mean, if I had all this knowledge, I wouldn't have done it.
Yeah. And that's the thing, I think that, like so much of medicine should be informed consent. And I just feel like so much of my past was not informed consent. It's not because it's not the full truth, right? It's saying this will regulate your cycle. Even if they just added one more sentence onto that, which was, this will give you a bleed, but it will not make you ovulate, which means that when you come off this, you will be back to where you are now.
But the fun fact is that I didn't even bleed. So they sold it to me like, oh, there you go. Aren't you lucky? And I was like, I guess I am lucky. It was quite bizarre, I have to say. Yeah.
Yeah. And also that's a bit of a cop-out answer too. It's like, oh, well, this is why, like you're probably not on the right estrogen dose or something like that. But yeah, that's a bit of an interesting answer as well. And then, so what happened? Was there anything else? So during that time, so that you were on the pill, like you said about how your weight increased when you were younger, and like, did any of that change while you were like during this time when you're on the pill, or was that still a concern for you?
No, it has forever been a concern of mine. My metabolism, I did a metabolism test once, and I remember I was quite advanced in my taking care of myself, let me call it like that, journey. So I was training, I was taking care of my diet, no fad cereal diet or anything like that, no, proper food kind of diet. And I remember thinking, just tracking calories for some time, it doesn't seem that I can eat the same amount that other people can. And I'm not talking about the super lucky ones. I'm talking about the average, person out there. So I did this test, and there was a scale that was like a traffic light, like red, amber, green, with a little animal in case you didn't get the colors. And I filled on the amber towards the red with a little snail. And the guy that was reading my results to me said, yeah, your metabolism is on the super slow kind of level. I said, yeah, well, I mean, it all kind of makes sense. So yeah, that's always been an issue for me. I to be honest, I also think it's a bit of a generational thing. So I'm a late 80s kid. And I think anyone growing up during the 90s, probably early 2000s as well, there was this obsession with, trying to be as tiny as you can. And, some people manage to very unhealthily get to a point. Other people just don't have that body type. And that was me. I've always been very athletic. I put on muscle very quickly. And I've always done a lot of sports in school even. And so, for a long time, I felt very uncomfortable in my body, which isn't great.
Yeah. And I think you're right. It was a rough time to grow up, really. Like when you didn't have a body type that suited that, when you weren't that, what did they call Kate Moss? Heroin chic? Like,
yes,
that is something to be proud of. Like, what? It's, yeah. I mean, it was that era. And it was also the era of like low fat, that anything with fat in it was a demon. Margarine was the best thing invented. Butter was the worst thing you could eat. Like all of those things. Low fat was the fad. But again, unfortunately, if you're like us and have a little bit of insulin resistance, that's the worst thing, because we're just like replacing fat with sugar, especially in products that needed fat for palatability. You just had to add sugar into them. And so, yeah, like double whammy, bad for us.
Yeah, because I also have, I think I forgot to mention, but I have quite bad insulin resistance. So that was the first thing that I had to get, a hold of to be able to get on track when it
Yeah.
comes to my periods, to everything hormonal. That was, I think, the keystone for me, was just balancing my blood sugar levels.
Yeah, and that's the I did skip over that, sorry, because I kind of knew this about you, but that's a good kind of when that is that kind of what you found was like your main driver of your PCOS? Was there anything else that was driving it?
I mean, yes, although I've lived not so much now, funny enough, because I'm a mom, I've lived a very stressful life at many different periods of my life for different reasons. Sometimes it was family related, sometimes it was work, probably it was, all around quite stressful. And I'm a person that, just goes with it and chases things. And I was living in a very big city. So overall, that didn't help. My lifestyle was probably not supporting me in that sense. So yes, it was a little bit of stress, which I thought was fine. Who's not stressed if you live in London?
You just try
But
and do
yeah,
too much, right? Like it's
that's the
everything's
thing. I
hard
mean,
to get everywhere. Everything you just try and pack in too much. It's yeah.
the whole I will sleep when I'm dead. Yeah, maybe not.
And also too, you add into that all of the endurance exercise and long exercise and high intensity exercise that you were doing to try and maintain your weight, right? Which is very natural for someone who has always struggled with weight and it not making sense. And especially then being told by someone, you've got a slow metabolism. So you're thinking, okay, well, all I can really do to control that is exercise more and eat less.
Correct. So I was just pushing in the wrong direction, just even harder.
Yeah, doing more of the same. I mean, and I say this with the utmost empathy because this is exactly my story too, and I'm that. But we're trying our best. We're trying to do what we think is the right thing, but actually it's working against us, especially when our stress bucket is already so full from living in a large metropolitan city, chasing your dreams like you were, dealing with family things, everything else that goes with along with life, and our stress bucket was just wildly overflowing. So for you, what do you think then made the biggest difference for you, or how did you control those two factors or work with your body more instead of working against it?
So I quit running almost altogether. And I started I was already walking quite a lot. So I kept that and I kept the resistance training. So I was more than putting on more stuff. I started deducting things that were not helping. I started taking inositol and then I was put later on metformin. And then I just did the protocol because I thought, well, let's see how this goes. And 2 weeks after taking inositol, I got my first period and I couldn't believe it. I thought it was witchcraft. Like, oh no, this is just, it's not correlation. It just happened and I'm trying to see things where there aren't. And then I got a period, I think 35 days later, and I couldn't believe it. And I kept on listening to all the podcasts that you had and listening to all the stories and how people had done different things with the protocol. And I was like, well, because at the same time, I was reading several blogs and a couple of books, and I said, there seems to be a lot to these, and I'm a very structured person. So, I mean, I have nothing to lose. Someone has made these, and there is a structure to it and a logic to it. And so I did the protocol. So, say this was all kickstarted February of 2021, while I was still in lockdown in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
I started the protocol, I think, May or June of that year. And that changed it all.
Yeah. And this was during quite a stressful time as well for you. So I mean, I'm just thinking back to that, we were talking about that stress bucket, and man, like again, we've just added a huge bunch more stress into that too. But isn't it amazing how
I was going through a horrible personal situation as well, which didn't help at all.
But isn't it amazing though that our body can respond so quickly, given the right tweaks, right? And that's the bit that I just love, is when we can find those drivers and then put in place those right tweaks, rather than like, I mean, you did make quite a dramatic change in terms of stopping your running and going back to walking, but obviously you were seeing that and going, I'm not feeling good doing this, or there's something about that, I mean, we're not saying that every person with PCOS can't run, but it was that you obviously weren't recovering from that, or there were there were obviously symptoms there that were driving that change, right?
And I had been running for a long time and I had been increasing the mileage and
Mm.
the intensity and everything. And after it's not that there was one story about someone that was training too hard. You had several stories about people with PCOS that were training way too hard. And you listen to one story, another story, several stories, and it's like, well, you know what? Maybe I am one of those as well. So what do I have to do is for trying it out?
Yeah, yeah. And it is amazing too, because it also gives you that permission to try it, right? Because so much of the
Mm.
time we do it and we go, oh, well, I couldn't stop that, because then that would be lazy, or that would be just me. I'm just looking for an excuse, like your mind
Or
plays
worse,
games.
or worse, if I stop running, I'm going to get even more fat. Do you
Yeah.
know how heavy that is? That was so heavy. I still remember, and I don't think this is spoken about enough. We believe that we have to be very tired and trained to almost death. Otherwise, we will look a very, unhealthy way.
Mm,
But those things aren't healthy
mm.
either.
Yeah, exactly. And so what happened? What did happen when you stopped running and went to walking?
Nothing. I mean, there were a couple of instances that I thought, yeah, I'm being lazy. I don't know about this. But as I started changing the way I ate and overall all the different changes, my periods started getting, shorter and I got a regular cycle.
Mm,
I had a regular cycle. I ate like a standard person at regular meal times. I didn't need, this is another thing. For years, I've been obsessed about the next meal. Do you know what that feels like? Having breakfast and wondering, when is lunchtime? What are we going to have for lunch? What is there for lunch? And I remember, and people, friends of mine, we talk about this. Isabel always carries several snacks in any bag that she has. That is not normal. And I thought everyone spent their whole days thinking about food. And I was the only one that was being outspoken about it. But it turns out it's not the case. So having internal peace is invaluable. And I remember having that realization one day, like, oh, wait a minute. I'm not obsessed. It was so say that I would have lunch at a Spanish time, say circa 2 p.m.
mhm.
At 12, I had been already fighting demons, about like all the different food scenarios. And I remember once just sitting down, chilling, not being anxious at all about what I was going to have for lunch. That was a massive win for me.
Yeah, isn't it just such that you're like, wow, the brain capacity that has taken me the last 20 something years of my life, thinking about that all the time, and worrying about it when it's not in your control, when you're at someone else's house, or when you're
Oh my
traveling and
God.
you don't have control. Oh, the just the like anxiety of that.
So much, so much. Because I traveled a lot for work. And anytime I'd be in a conference or anything, I remember just sneaking around food anywhere, anywhere, as if I had been, I don't know, in a war zone and like deprived of food for like a very long time. It just didn't make sense to me.
Yeah. And that's the thing that also it changes so quickly, right? Like this, how many weeks of doing this did that change for you, like after you started the program?
Honestly, I would say maybe a month.
Mm,
It wasn't even that much. It
yeah.
was drastic.
Yeah. And it does. And that's the thing is you go, wow, this is such a small change that can have such a dramatic improvement in my quality of life. Because really that's quality of life, isn't it? Just not having to think about that stuff people that haven't had it don't understand. But when you do, you go, wow, yes, 100%. If I didn't have to think about food all the time, my life would be dramatically different. And I could put that energy towards so many better things. So many.
Yeah.
So obviously as well, the reason that you went off the pill was that you were starting to think about having a family in the future. So so after your periods regulated, what happened in your story from there?
So I used the fertility awareness method, I think it is. So basically, I tracked my basal temperature with an app and I tracked other things so that I could pinpoint when I was most likely going to ovulate so I could time intercourse at the right time. I am quite a control freak. And I thought, because of my age, so I started trying when I was 35. I had PCOS. Everyone was quite dramatic about whether I could get pregnant or not. So, with all of these, like, lurking in my brain, I thought, well, let me try to have as a calculated approach to it as I can. so that if anything goes wrong, at least I've got the data to speak to professionals saying, this is what I tried, this is what I know, please help me out.
And I don't think that's
That
control
said,
freak at all. I think that is just very normal and sensible. Not a control freak at all.
thank you. Thank you. I just feel like this is not spoken about enough. And people just
Mm.
think that babies are made. Like, I just think that many people think that you can get pregnant any day that you're not bleeding, and that's not the case.
Yeah.
So anyway, with that knowledge, I think I tracked 3 or 4 cycles before we started trying. And when we started trying, I got pregnant on my first cycle, on my first month, sorry, yes, of trying. However, I wasn't that lucky because I had what it's called a miscarriage, which also not many people talk about, which is the fact that the heartbeat that the fetus had is no longer there. So the baby's no longer viable, but you don't know because there's no bleeding, there's no sign of anything. So only when you have a scan, somebody unfortunately has to tell you, and then you have to take measures to either get rid of it naturally. Some people can, other people can't. So some people have to undergo a procedure to, clean that up, so to speak, which is what I had to do because unfortunately my husband was traveling. And if you're alone at home, they won't let you, at least in the UK, just to let it happen. Or at least that was not the case for me. I think because I was traveling shortly afterwards. So that wasn't great. However, the following cycle, not the following because they tell you that the following you shouldn't try because that might be, again, something that could impact how regular your cycle is. You don't know when you ovulate because it changes things a little bit, just like when you give birth. So the following proper cycle where we could try it, I was quite insistent that I wanted to try because I didn't know if this had happened because of me having any PCOS kind of problem that I wasn't aware of or not. But because this was the first time that I had heard about this, I was quite concerned that there might be some problem. And I wanted to know as soon as possible if that was the case so I could do something about it again. So I got pregnant again. However, this is a bit of a rocky story. I had a twin pregnancy and only one of the embryos made it in the first 12 weeks. And this is something that my doctor didn't want to talk to me about. But you know how you recommend that we test for progesterone levels? I had extremely low progesterone levels. I tested them myself. And I had a private doctor. And I told my private doctor several times, hey, this is quite low, don't you think? And he was like, no, I think it's fine. And I said, well, could we maybe supplement? No way. So in hindsight, maybe I should have tried another doctor, but hey, yeah. But anyway,
And
there is
that's
a happy ending to the story. I have like a very healthy baby, massive baby, by the way. So I don't know what I would have done if I had twins. Yes, I just wanted to say that there's always a happy ending.
Yeah, and that is amazing. But also too, going back to that, it's so hard when you're like, I wish I could have tried a different doctor or something like that. But that's also often not within your control, right? And they are in a position where we should be trusting them, right? And should be trusting their judgment. And unfortunately, I think that the research is just not that widely known about lower progesterone. I think it's getting there. I mean, the new NICE guidelines, which is what the UK operates under and kind of their best practice, has at least gone a little bit further in the last couple of years of saying, well, anyone that's had a history of miscarriages or early pregnancy bleeding should be put on progesterone. But the threshold is still way too high. It's still that you have to have had 3 miscarriages and then early pregnancy bleeding. There's no talk about PCOS being a risk factor for that anyway. And so that basically anyone we kind of treat it that pretty much anyone that's had PCOS should be on progesterone because of, and this is what I get all our patients to say now is ask their doctor if their doctor says, no, I don't think so, say, well, what would be the risk of doing it, right? Because then that is a really good question to ask because there is no risk, especially when we're just trying to get your progesterone levels up to what we know in the research are the optimal levels. It's not like we're trying to send them into the thousands. It's just like the difference of 40 to 80 or something like that, right? Like going from slightly suboptimal to definitely optimal and going, well, it's unlikely that this would have affected that, but hey, at least it's one thing that we can control, and we might as well when there's so little risk. And this is what I find so interesting about medicine, is that they make some weird decisions. Like they're really, really okay with prescribing metformin when we know it crosses the placenta and we know it affects the fetus. Like, but yet we're still so okay to prescribe that during pregnancy, but we're not okay to prescribe a natural hormone that your body produces anyway, and we're just trying to top the levels up. It just seems wildly bizarre to me.
I know. And, with that in mind, and as I have reflected several times about both my pregnancy and my delivery experience, I realized that I had quite a good, at least by his credentials, quite a good doctor. Maybe he was somewhat in his 60s or maybe late 50s. I can't really tell. But I made it a point that if I were to get pregnant another time around, I'm looking, and I've actually found a young doctor that I have asked a million questions. I'm the most annoying patient regarding PCOS, delivery, treatment, so many things. And I have spoken to about five. And only when I found out someone that was open, that seemed up to date, and that was open to debate and maybe go with whatever I would prefer, that has been my chosen person. I didn't want someone that was very old school. My experience over here, because I moved back to Spain, my experience here has been that older doctors, they know better. They've always done things a particular way, and they're less open to debate or discuss things like the ones that we're doing. Yeah. I mean, this obviously doesn't apply everywhere else in the world or just everywhere, but that has been my experience. And also because the person that I was talking to was younger, I felt it was an easier conversation as it was more leveled rather than someone that is, I don't know, 2 or 3 generations older than me, where there's like this respect barrier. I know better because I'm older kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a really good approach to doing it, is just going and being like interviewing them and seeing, are we on the same page in terms of what I want and what I want from you as my doctor? Like, and remembering that.
But it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so hard though, because it's hard to find someone that's even willing to engage in those conversations, right? Like that's a really hard thing. Because you said about like my preference in delivery. How did your birth and after that go?
For those who don't know, when you're preparing to give birth, you are asked to prepare and share with your medical team what is called a birth plan, where you say, well, if I was able to choose, I would like to deliver my baby in such way. So with or without medication, which medications, do I want the epidural or not? Do I want a C-section? Sometimes in some places you can, just opt for a C-section. No, I want a vaginal delivery, etc. Now, I did walk in with my preferences, but I did say, I don't know anything about delivering a baby. You guys are an experienced team. So this is my plan, but I might just throw it out of the window from what I've heard. And so basically, I wanted to be able to have some medication, but in an ideal world, I would have loved not to need it. And I wanted to have a water birth, which did not happen. So I was put on the bath, but then I don't know, I think I had a way too much instrumentalized experience. They took me out of the water to measure how I was dilating. I was dilating so well. Everything was going perfect, but someone was on a schedule, and that someone wasn't me. It was my medical team. And so they took me out of the water. I did end up taking medication because once you're outside of the water, you experience much more pain, which always seemed a bit woo-woo to me. Like, this doesn't make any sense. It does for some reason when you're in the water. But anyway, so I was out of the water. I did get a lot of relief. And then the doctor started hurrying me. It wasn't quite clear that the baby was in stress or in danger, but he insisted it was the case. In hindsight, I'm not that sure about it. And so they topped up my epidural way too much, to the point that I was completely numb. So I couldn't feel anything. No pushing. I obviously couldn't stand up because I had lost all the control of my lower body. And so I ended up I did have a vaginal birth. How much I did versus how much did the doctor do is in question, because I had a major episiotomy, really, really big. And then my baby came out with his hand by his head. So he pushed it even further. So I ended up with a massive wound that healed terribly bad, terribly bad. So, and I remember not feeling anything. And in the moment, you've got like all the rush of hormones and you're happy and your baby's there and everything is amazing. But I remember the face of the doctor like really pushing to like, you know, stitch me up. That didn't look easy. And it has taken a lot of physiotherapy to fix the scar, which
Mm.
again is something that is not spoken about.
Absolutely. What the need for physiotherapy or the risk of birth injuries?
No, the need of female physiotherapy. And I'm not talking physiotherapy like, can you squat or
Mm.
does your back hurt? No, I'm talking pelvic floor. I'm talking a lot of dysfunction that can come either from pregnancy or delivery, whichever delivery you have, and all the work that has to be done with different layers of scars. Whether you have a scar down there like I do, or whether you have it from a C-section, there's a lot of trouble that can come with it, and people don't talk about it.
Yeah. And so many things that you don't think are related. Like I now have quite a bad back injury because I don't think core, even though I was like, doing my rehab exercises and things like that, just my core strength probably wasn't quite up to what it needed to be when we had a major flood here in New Zealand. We had, like in the grand scheme of world disasters at the moment, it's tiny, but it was quite significant. And I was hauling 100-liter like wheelie bin, rubbish bins full of water from that have like we're having to bail that and then drag them up onto the street and then empty them out. And I mean, it was because it was that sort of in the moment of adrenaline and things like that, you do that. But since then, I quite severely injured my back, and that's taken a long time to repair. But probably like when it comes down to it, the core thing was that my core strength wasn't really up to doing that. Like, yes, I was physically able to, but I wasn't able to do that safely. And that's where, but the same thing could happen if I got back into doing like really heavy squatting or deadlifting again before I was ready to do that, which is what a lot of people see, especially with social media. They see people getting back to exercise and like, especially lifting weights and stuff like that. And it seemed to be a bit of a heroic thing that you could go and run a half marathon 8 weeks after you've given birth or something like that. That might not actually be so safe. Who knows? Might be for that person if they've had like someone look and clear that. But for a lot of people, that wouldn't be like reasonable or safe for them to do that.
Correct. But then again, you only see those, videos and pictures on social media, like, oh, I gave birth 2 weeks ago, and here I am with a dumbbell in my hand. Like, maybe you shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah. And you don't see the other side, which is, I mean, I didn't do anything because I ended up having a C-section. I didn't do, apart from walking, a single thing, not even rehab exercises for 4 months, because I still felt super tender. I was like, nah, it's sore. I don't even feel that it's safe to be doing that. It probably was, but also too, I just didn't really have the time, like or the brain capacity to add one more thing in. I was back working. I was doing other stuff. I just didn't have the capacity. So yeah, I mean, I think that it's you're so right that pelvic floor physio and ridiculously in New Zealand we have an amazing public health system, and part of that is something called the Accident Compensation Corporation, ACC, which cover any physiotherapy for any injury that you have. But until last year, birth injuries were not included in that because it was premeditated. You basically signed up for that. But yet, if you had a snowboarding accident, you were covered. How outrageous is that? Because
that's unbelievable, especially considering everybody has a mother.
That's right too. It's like, so what? Your snowboarding accident wasn't premeditated because you didn't strap that snowboard onto your feet. So, but yet again, birth injuries were. So anyway, thank goodness for some amazing physiotherapists here who have campaigned heavily for that to be covered. That is now covered. But for my group, my cohort that we were birthing together, that hadn't came into effect yet. So a couple of them that had really severe birth injuries, very similar to you, in that it was possibly not a well-handled birth, are not covered for their birth injury because that hadn't come into effect yet. So yeah, such madness. But again, just so good to hear people talking about it and going, this happens. And so you found the physiotherapy really helpful for that for that, healing
Yes.
that scar, or like mobilizing that scar tissue?
Yes, and I want to tell you, it's not pleasant. It's
No,
not pleasant at all.
it is not
And
a
no,
massage.
and no, because also it becomes, if it doesn't heal properly, it's very sensitive and it's sort of traumatic in a way. So it's hard for someone to manipulate it, to show you all the exercises. And let me tell you, they're boring. They're really boring. All this rehab, if you have 1 hour for you after you've had a baby, the last thing you want to do is go and do your pelvic floor exercises. Honestly, it took so much willpower, but I was in a really bad place physically. I mean, like it was really bad, and it did need a lot of work. But now I am sitting like anyone. I can squat, I can move, and I have no dysfunction whatsoever. But it wasn't free. I've put on a lot of work.
Yeah. And I just said it then before. I just said, for the first 4 months, I couldn't be bothered, right? Like that is a difference. You were the one that put in that work. And I can totally see that it takes so much willpower to do those very boring exercises. As you said, when you've only got 1 hour to yourself, like that is the last thing you want to be doing, is lying on the ground, just lifting one leg, literally.
I feel so seen right now. I swear to God. I remember being there, half dressed, reeking of breast milk, thinking I'm the most disgusting human being in the planet right now, lifting one knee from the floor. Yes.
It's so demoralizing, isn't it? Oh my goodness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it is the kind of the work that needs to be done, and the yeah, I think normalizing it like we are now is so helpful for a lot of people going, yeah, okay, I'm not crazy. I do feel the same, that this is just like very, very demoralizing doing this, especially for something that, and it's all of that thinking as well about what if they'd done this? What if they'd done that? I wouldn't have been in this situation. And that's a hard one to get over, isn't it?
Yes, it is, unfortunately.
Yeah. And so for you, the other thing that's I often talk about is different experiences with breastfeeding, especially with PCOS. How was your feeding experience? How did you choose to feed your baby?
So I went into it like I went with my birth plan.
Mm.
I think I would like to do X. However, let's see how it goes, because everyone says this is not under my control. Then I had the baby, and I don't know whether this was your experience, but having like Isabel before baby is not the same, and things not the same as Isabel after she had the baby. And I'm talking within days. So I started breast. So I had some colostrum that I had expressed before I went into labor.
How did you do that?
And so I took it.
Was that just a manual? Like, were you just basically expressing yourself manually? Did you use a pump? Like, what worked for you for expressing the
Oh no, I didn't even have a pump. So all I knew is that, oh, maybe you can try and do this. So I would like spend a lot of time trying to do this. So from what I was reading, it seemed that this experience was quite easy for some people. It might be the case. It was not for me. I just put
Mm,
on a lot of effort into it. Don't ask me why.
mm,
I think I get into this like squirrel mode preparing for the winter. I do it all the time. And that just kicked in. And for some reason I thought I had to save this just in case. So I had quite a lot of it. It was terribly hard. It was quite uncomfortable. I remember my back would hurt after I would try, and I don't even know that I was doing it well. I just had the end product frozen. I took it to the hospital. I remember I had about 16 syringes, which I thought, wow, I'm doing pretty well. Ha. Until I had a massive baby that had them in the first night. All of that. And I was like, okay, this was supposed to be my insurance policy. It's completely useless. Moving on. Put the baby to breast several times, and he seemed to be doing fine. But what did I know? There's several checkups and weigh-ins and whatnot. He was putting on weight, but sometimes I would supplement because I had to stay in the hospital for quite a long time because of my injury. And I remember sometimes the nurses would tell me, oh, he's getting fidgety, he's hungry. And they would stare at me in the eyes, trying to ask for something, but not saying it. And I remember at one point saying, I don't know what's going on. There's clearly something. Can you just tell me? Because they would ask me, how are we going to feed the baby? And I would say, I don't know. What are we talking about? And so they were asking whether I was open to give them formula. And then at one point, the lady was really stressed, and she said, can I give him formula?" I said, "Yeah, sure. Like, are we going to starve the baby? This is dumb." And then I went on to realize that some people feel very strongly about whether or not to give them formula, which is something that I didn't know before
Mm.
having a baby, because I just thought it was a matter of practicalities. Anyway, I went home. I had the old, really tiny formula bottle. And for 3 weeks, I was just breastfeeding on demand. At week number 3, the baby stopped latching. He hadn't been feeding great from what I know now, because he would took way too long to feed, and that was not normal, apparently. But again, I didn't know. And then I guess he either just got tired of it or was too hungry, because I have a very big boy. He eats a lot. And so I went to several lactation consultants. And in the meantime, because I was getting really stressed and the baby was getting really stressed, the whole situation was quite unsustainable. I was told to pump in the meantime. Why don't you pump? And so I started pumping. And I thought, this is a 1 week situation. Like, I'm going to give myself a breastfeeding holiday. That turned into like 9 or 10 months,
Which is
because
definitely not
we
a
tried.
holiday. Thing is like breastfeeding the hard way.
And the worst thing is that this became an obsession, which again, I'm not sure that it's spoken about enough, because I had a really good supply, and I was told I was very lucky. My baby was putting on a lot of weight very quickly. "Oh, you're so lucky." I was getting so many compliments. "Oh, you're so lucky," or "You're doing very well for your baby. You're so good to your baby." I was getting like all this positive reinforcement that surely every mother should be doing this. And therefore, I was a good mother. And if I were to stop this, I would be the worst mother on the planet. And so I obsessed about it, as I do with everything. And I thought, okay, I'll just start exclusively pumping, and then enter mostly a Reddit group about what it is, how it works, how frequently you have to do it, your schedule, how many ounces or milliliters per day are normal, tracking it, fluctuations in supply. Do I have enough? How to build a freezer stash, and all of these. It was insane, but I did very well because there was a lot of milk. But nobody in this planet would get my boy to latch again, so I did that for a very long time.
Yeah. And so you ended up, I remember you ended up exclusively pumping for 10 months, but feeding him for over a year because you had built up such a
More than that. More than
more.
that, I'm telling you, I went all crazy. I mean, I had what is called an oversupply, which means that you have more milk per day that your baby drinks.
Yeah.
Which means that you can put some aside and freeze it, and build what people call the freezer stash or a milk bank for just in case situations. Again, I have grown up with the just in case situation, especially when it comes to food. I'm telling you, I had snacks whenever, so I had this terrible mentality that obviously permeated into this situation. So
And
yeah.
I mean, although that's incredible and that's amazing, you now look back and go, "Wow, mentally that was not great for me," right? I can see.
No, there was a lot of anxiety. There was so much anxiety there.
Yeah, yeah. And what do you think? You obviously think that what perpetuated this was actually quite similar to what a lot of people, how they develop kind of disordered eating, is because they're getting positive reinforcement about how they look when they lose weight and things like that. It sounds like a very similar thing.
Oh no, it totally is. So enter the situation. So I don't know what the experience of having a baby is like in other countries, but in the UK, you go at certain weeks, you take your baby and they weigh them. And so they have these growth curves, and your baby should stay within the same growth curve or maybe go up a growth curve, which is celebrated. Now, I've said several times I had a very big baby. He went over the whole percentile thing. So he was way too big or too heavy for his age, to the point that you would see him and maybe consider that he was overly fed. And doctors would say this at the beginning of my meeting with them. And then they would ask me right afterwards, "Oh, for sure, this is a formula fed baby," thinking like the underlying assumption was this baby's overfed because it's formula fed, which is bad. But the moment I said, "No, it's a breastfed baby," then they would take a step back and say, "Oh, no, no, he's not overweight. He's wonderful." So there's this double standard, and there's so much judgment on how you feed your baby that was passed on to me and that obsessed me for a very long period of time, that I wish wasn't the case, honestly. Because, some people are lucky and can have the feeding experience that they want. Some people can't. And I don't think they should, I don't think people like me should feel like saints. And I don't think people like them should feel misery.
Absolutely. I think that is so true. And I think it's especially in countries like the UK and New Zealand where breastfeeding is so promoted for, and that's great. But the problem that we have is that what they haven't considered is the effect of that on people that either choose that doesn't work for them, or it literally doesn't, when they're in a position where their baby literally stops latching. And I had a very similar experience to you. Floss refused the breast at 3 months, and I exclusively pumped, although I was always co-feeding with formula as well. So it's absolutely not within our control. And we have a similar thing where we go and get the baby measured here. It's called Plunket, which is a charitable organisation. I actually stopped going. I stopped attending after the first session because I was like,
it's horrible.
I can see that she's absolutely fine. She is absolutely fine. She is not losing weight. And I just don't want the judgment, and it's not helpful for me or healthy. And there's no real value that you're adding here. You're just detracting. And so I'm actually just not going to attend. Which is a shame, because some people have amazing Plunket experiences. They feel super well, just that they feel really supported, and it's great. And they love that relationship they have with their midwife there. But that wasn't the case for me. And I just took myself out of that situation and said, you know what, this is not, it's not helpful for me, so I'm just going to stop attending, which was probably the best decision that I could have made. But then again, you are then a bit of risk where they might pick up on things that you don't. And so as a mother, you go, well, I better go, because just in case there's something that they pick up on that I don't know, because I've never been a mother before. So how would I know?
Yeah, but you know what? I had a friend that had a similar experience to yours, but she didn't step back from situation. And so instead she had the same doctor that drilled, and she had such a horrible time, because my friend, she's very tall and slim, and so is her partner, tall and slim, and so is her first child. She's a very long baby that naturally doesn't weigh too much. And that, if you look at the parents and you apply a little bit of common sense, it would be quite unusual for them to have a very chunky baby. Well, none of that applied. And they made her feel terrible over and over. And sometimes, no, many a night, even if the baby started sleeping for longer, they forced her to wake up to pump so she could push more milk into that baby that, today she's a toddler and she's skinny and tall and she's very healthy.
Absolutely fine. And I think this is the as you said, a massive double standard with the formula feeding versus breastfeeding, right? Is that they're saying, oh, well, if you're formula feeding, you must be literally like shoving that milk down their throat. But yet if you try to do that with breastfeeding, oh, well, that's absolutely fine. And it's like, hey, hang on, isn't this the same baby that is going to feed until they're satisfied, regardless of how they're feeding? Yeah, it's a crazy thing. And unfortunately, there are a few studies are like in this space quite fraught with, I think, bias. But there was a really interesting one that they did in the US where they took siblings. And I think this is the best study, because there's so much that can happen when it comes to, like, a lot of the measures they're looking at with breastfeeding is things like IQ and body weight and things that can be affected by so many socioeconomic factors, regardless of how their baby is fed. And so the one that I love is the one they did in the US where they took siblings. So, because therefore you strip out all of those socioeconomic factors, because they are literally brought up by the same household. So they looked at where one sibling had been formula fed and one had been breastfed. And what they found was absolutely no difference in those babies at, I think it was 30 years. So they followed them for 30 years. No difference in IQ, no difference in weight, no difference in immunity, because that's the other thing, is asthma, allergies, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, that's the study that I like. Yes, it probably is my bias as well, because my baby was partially formula fed. So maybe I'm looking for reinforcement there, but I think that it's quite a good study because it totally takes out all of those socioeconomic factors. Whereas the one that they like to report on is the Brazil study. Again, great study, but they say that they factored in all socioeconomic factors, but I just don't think that you can, right? Like you can't factor in a a parent that's had to return to work 2 weeks after giving birth versus one who's had the ability to stay at home for the first year and focus on breastfeeding. So I think that those are quite interesting things and therefore fraught with so much. I think that the reason that they are pushing breastfeeding is for great reasons, but I think what they don't understand is the very, very negative consequences that
judging.
Yeah, the judgment.
You could recommend something without the judgment. You could say, you know what, it would be great, but if you can't, that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's it. Eliminate the judgment. There's so much judgment when it comes to women and everything that has to do with our reproductive everything, whether you can get pregnant, how fast you can get pregnant or not, if you struggle with that, or whether you have miscarriages, or how do you give birth, because there's judgment on that as well. How quickly you recover and you have six-pack abs and you're a model, even if you never wear, but all of a sudden you had a baby, so surely you should look like that 2 months afterwards. And then they're judging you based on how you're feeding your child and whatnot. It's like it's so unnecessary. And the problem is that after you give birth, you're flooded with all of these hormones that leave your brain gaga for at least 3 months. You're recovering from something major. You're not in the best, frame of mind to say, no, enough. So I'm quite, honestly, it's quite surprising that you backed off from that practitioner, because I was not in my best place after I had given birth. Honestly, if someone had told me, this is the way you should do X, Y, and Z with your baby, I would have just followed through. My brain was dead.
Yeah. And I mean, I think I'm quite lucky that I had support of other people saying that to me as well. It's just being like, this is not, just don't listen to it, just disengage in that. And that's probably what gave me the confidence or the clarity to do that. Whereas, as you said, if it was just me on my own trying to navigate this, I likely would have just followed on and gone, I don't know, I've never been a mother before, I don't know what I'm doing, therefore I'm just going to follow this along. And yeah, so I think in hindsight now, based on your kind of breastfeeding journey, what would you say to someone who's in a similar position to you, that their baby has latched or they didn't have, like the milk supply, or there was something else out of their control and they're feeling this kind of pressure or anxiety that you were feeling to continue breastfeeding because it was the marker of a good mother?
So it's quite odd, because I gave birth at the same time as one of my closest friends did. And we had very different experiences, because she didn't have, and I'm very lucky that I heard about this in your podcast about changes in breast tissue during pregnancy. This is something that happened to me, but I never thought about it being a mark of a successful or not breastfeeding journey. A friend of mine, I remember talking to her because she was 3 months ahead of me pregnancy-wise. I remember asking her and telling her, like, hey, what do you do with the bra situation? I'm really uncomfortable. What type of bra should I get? Several times in my pregnancy, because my breasts changed in size several times in pregnancy. And she would look at me saying, I don't understand what you're saying. So hers didn't change at all, which should have been a sign that was not going to go all that well for her, but none of us knew. And so she'd gone into the same, not that healthy world of breast is best. I should breastfeed my baby no matter what, but she didn't have the supply. And I remember talking to her early on and saying, let it go. It's fine. You just have to feed your baby. Your baby doesn't care how you're feeding your baby. It's fine. Think about how more convenient it is. You can wear whichever bra you want. You don't have to use a pump. No one is commenting on whether you're breastfeeding in public or not, or your nipple this, or your blouse that. You can wear whatever you want. And so on and so forth. I was trying to give her like very positive encouragement, but there was a family history there where there was a lot of like negative connotation of not breastfeeding, which is funny because apparently her mother couldn't breastfeed because her breast tissue didn't change either. So, hey, but yeah, there was a lot of guilt being passed on that fortunately she got to a point that she realized that it wasn't healthy for her, but it took a lot of time and she did take a lot of hormones. Because sometimes if you go to a doctor and you say, I don't have any milk supply, they can try and boost that. Mm-hmm. But what wasn't told to her was that if you have a history of mental health problems, this could make it worse.
Ah, right. So domperidone is probably the drug that they're talking about here. Yeah.
Listen, yes, that word. I remember her talking about it like casually and me thinking like, oh yeah, that sounds great. And then she spiraled so
Mm,
badly. And it was only months after when we were talking to someone where they said, didn't your doctor tell you that this can make depression much, much, much worse? At a time where someone that has a history of depression and could have postnatal depression. Listen, yeah.
yeah.
So anyway,
And I took it and I never got told that either. And I mean, like I don't have a history, but they didn't know that. I mean, in New Zealand, your obstetrician doesn't even talk to your doctor. Like it's ridiculous. But they didn't know that. Never got asked, never got told. Like, yeah. So good. Because also talking to another past patient as well who had a really severe reaction in terms of weight gain with domperidone. So you'll
oh
hear,
really?
yeah. So people listening to this, you'll hear loads of different experiences with these, not only just breastfeeding, but different drugs and different things. So that's a really good thing to know. So I mean, it's really helpful hearing this because you had this experience. It's not like you're now in the position of saying, what would I say to a friend who was going through this? You literally had a friend at that time, right? Who you were
But
saying,
but it didn't matter because
yeah,
that's what I would tell all because I had
yeah.
several friends that went through the same, and I would tell all my friends, girl, don't judge yourself. Just do, whatever is best for your family and whatever is best for your baby and all this like positive talk. And then when it came to me, I judged myself to death.
Mm. And it would be so hard for you as well because you're like, but I don't have the same experience. I have all this milk. And
That's the thing.
she's different. She doesn't have the milk, so there's nothing she can do about it. I have the milk, so I have to use it.
So I felt so guilty about that. Like I
Mm.
am wasting so much potential here. I could do so good for my baby. I could even donate if I wanted to. Like how, like this is no. And then they tell you that when you're breastfeeding or when you're exclusively pumping, they say this is really hard. Just take it one day at a time. So set yourself a goal. I'm going to do this for this amount of months. And so I would do that. And then I would consider slowly weaning. So breastfeeding less, for those who don't know, and the guilt. There was
Mm.
so much guilt. So I don't know why I went on for so long. I mean, it did get easier because I would pump less, but I mean, I'm pretty sure that there was a lot of guilt behind it.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same. Right. It's that, well, I can, yes, it's a massive tax on my life. Like, I'm literally having to every day pack up all my pump stuff and put it in, make sure like pump when as soon as I get into the car to go to work. And then I have my alarm set for like 11 a.m. and then 3 p.m. And then, to make sure I pump it. And it's a huge mental load of that as well. But I felt like that was the one thing I could do, right? I couldn't give her all the milk that she needed, but I could do this little bit. And if I did this, then I wouldn't feel that. But I still, like, it's still a mind game. I still think back and go, what if I'd done this? What if I'd done that? Even though I had all the red flags, all the red flags. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm the same as you. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know whether I would have changed it. I don't know whether, what I'd do next time. But I just think that it's good to hear this and go, you know what, like we're not alone if we feel like this.
Yeah, and it's very easy to think logically when it comes to other people and other people's experiences. It's not so much when it's about you.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's all that emotion, all that guilt. And sometimes it's if I can reduce that guilt a little bit, it would be worth it.
Yeah.
And but I don't know if it is. That's the way I think. Because the guilt's almost worse than the toll it takes on you to do it. But yeah, I just think it is very helpful or enlightening to at least talk about it and share these experiences. So that's in terms of your other PCOS, full kind of PCOS journey. If you could give teenage Isabel some advice, what would that be?
I just wish teenage Isabel would have had someone that would have taken her to a couple of doctors to get the full picture, and to know more. This is why I try to tell as many people as I can about what PCOS is and what it might look like for different people, so that not only it's normalized, but so more people know about it. Because maybe that could have gotten to me. That and not jumping on the first birth control that anyone gives you.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
How does teenage Isabel know? She's
Yeah,
too young to know.
absolutely. And maybe teenage isn't the right time, right? Sometimes we need that little bit of maturity, that little bit of experience. And so maybe it's the more, what would you then say to the Isabel that came off the birth control, that then was like, oh wow, I'm getting all these symptoms, I've got this, especially that weight gain, that 10 kilos in 2 months, which people would say, that's impossible. The math doesn't work. You can't put on that much weight when you're doing that much running. And you're like, well, lived experience shows that it's very true.
Yeah, yeah. I would say listen to the people that have been there and that have managed to control it, because so can you. But it's hard because there's no one track, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not, I don't know. Like my son has bronchitis. Oh, he has bronchitis. Here's the fix. I think of PCOS as if it were a tree. That's why it's a syndrome, right? It can look many different ways. It can flourish different ways throughout your life, and there's different ways to treat it. And coming to terms with having a chronic condition that you will have to live with and manage differently throughout life is a very hard thing. It's a very hard pill for me to swallow. And it took a lot of time to come to terms with it. And I would say other people have done it, so can you.
Yeah.
Just be patient.
And it is, because you're a successful, driven person who has managed to put their mind to everything else in their life and achieve that. And this is the one thing that's out of your control, right? And it is so hard to, and out of control, but also now there are certain parts that are within your control, and you can focus on those parts.
But you have to, the problem that I see, Claire, also is that I've spoken to so many different doctors, not just OBs, different doctors. So many of them now have told me that I don't have PCOS, that I have even questioned myself. And now I just know, if I walk into a place and I'm speaking to a doctor, it happened a year ago here in Spain. I'm talking to a doctor. I explained to him, I come with like bullet points so I can summarize my history to him. I say, sorry, it's going to be a lot of information. Here you go. Now you're up to date. I have PCOS. Looks at me, judges me, and he says, you don't have PCOS. I'm like, man, have you listened to everything that I've just told you? Like, you're not respecting me, but also you're just judging me because my skin is not a mess and I'm not overweight. Therefore, I don't have PCOS. How simplistic is that? He then looks at my ovaries. It turned out that I had a lot of cysts at the time. And then he changed his mind. Like, they said, oh yeah, you have PCOS. And I was like, right, see you never.
It's like the double standard of the breastfeeding formula feeding. It's like, if you're not, yeah, exactly. And I mean, in some cases, like, it's a good thing, because it's like, okay, well, I've reversed these physical signs, right? If you've seen me, and that is part of PCOS. It's part of the tree, right? The tree might have had lost its leaves, or its leaves were yellow and it was looking, not particularly healthy. And now, like, it's flourishing, it's looking really good. And so if we didn't know that tree before, we wouldn't have known that there was ever an issue. But if we treated that tree the same way as what it was before, that it wasn't getting the right nutrients, that it wasn't getting the right amount of water for it, because it is a different kind of tree that needs different amounts of water than the one next door, then we're probably going to end up with a very similar looking tree in 2 years' time, right? Because we're not treating it in the way that it needs to work with its genetics.
I love the way that you've put it. I really do.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing, is going, okay, I now know what I need to do to help my tree flourish. And I know what also puts it in the position where it's not flourishing. And those are the things that I can control. I can't control that I have this chronic condition, that I will always have to think about those things. What I can control is those little things, those little non-negotiables that I do every day that actually aren't that taxing anymore in my life, that I know keep this at bay and help me really flourish, rather than, being a little bit yellow and and just not thriving the way that I need to be to operate at my best.
And knowing that it's okay. We can't change it, but, we can come to terms with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that actually we can still thrive. We're not abnormal. Yeah. We're not lesser females or lesser humans. We are equal, and different. We just have to do just slightly different. So I love that. And I love that analogy. Thanks for giving that to us. So thank you so much for sharing your story, Isabel. It's been a great conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed having this with you and sharing all of our experiences and hearing the experience of your last, what is now 2 years of living with this lifestyle and dealing with this and all of the things that life has thrown at you in that meantime. And I can't wait to see what happens next in your journey.
Thank you, Claire. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening in, and a very, very special thanks to Isabel for sharing her story and being so open with us. As you've heard, she's been doing our program now for years. There have been ups and downs and trauma, but her simple lifestyle tweaks have helped her weather these ups and downs. And by keeping things very simple, she's been able to maintain these for years. So if you want this for you, then join us in the Ovi app. Head to www.ovie.io. The link's in the show notes, and you can start the questionnaire to find out what's driving your PCOS today. If you're finding value from these podcasts, then we'd be so grateful if you could hit follow on the PCOS Explained podcast. This means that not only you'll get the latest releases, but also that other people are more likely to find this podcast. That's the way the algorithm works. And we all know how important it is to get good information about PCOS. So if you can hit that follow button, it means that people with PCOS that don't know that this podcast exists are more likely to find it. So thank you so much for your help there. Now stand by for our disclaimer. The information contained in this podcast has been prepared for the purpose of providing information, including about the PCOS nutritionist products and services, and is designed to support clients' overall wellness. It is not intended to provide medical advice or designed to rectify, treat, or cure any specific medical conditions or diseases. Nothing stated or shared in our podcast is intended to be and must not be taken to be medical advice. Please seek the advice of professionals as appropriate regarding the evaluation of any specific information, opinion, advice, or content contained in our podcast.